In terms of integration strategies, we're specifically looking at either taking over our suppliers in order to get a more consistent and more control of our supply chain, or we look at taking over our intermediaries in order to get ourselves closer to our customers. That's not really good, hey? In order to get ourselves closer to our customers. That looks awful. Okay, or we can look at taking over our competitors. Now, I think, Jen, you shared something about ShopRite buying over some of the more food-type stores from Massmart. It's not a surprise. Massmart is underperforming. They're repurposing Game again, and we'll talk about Game being repurposed into mini macros. Macro in Pietermaritzburg, it appears, will not come back. They've asked for land. They don't want to stay at Camperdown because of the situation and potential looting again, but it appears that the municipality will not allow them to have the new land or allow to rezone it. The truth is that's thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs down the drain because of naive thinking. And I think it's about not wanting to pay bribes. That to me is where we're at in this country. Quickly. Okay, right, okay, bye. So we'll see what happens in terms of the municipality and digging their heels and potentially using macro. Who are the macro shoppers? Love shopping at macro. Love their bulk specials. So for me, macro, it's a sad day when they left. It was actually quite pathetic what your life is when you miss a store, you know. So what's the worst thing that's happened this year? I saw you went bald. No, macro closed down. I mean, this could only be worse. Sunday liquor specials. Right, in terms of integration, so here we either take over our competitors, horizontal integration. We've seen several of those. I mean, some of the more recent car company purchases was Toyota purchasing Subaru. Honestly, if you look at the connects between car companies, it's the most incestuous industry in the world, where the new Mazda, in fact, if you lift everything underneath and you scrub away the badges, it is a Isuzu Bucky that's just been given a Mazda cover. So, and we can understand why Mazda is able to launch it at 600 and something thousand, because you're literally buying a 589,000 Isuzu. Sorry, I'm being a little bit facetious there. But we've seen it happen where what is underneath is a generic for another car. You can't tell the difference between Nissan and Renault, and there's so many of those. And we've seen how car companies have taken over each other. In terms of that, obviously Massmart getting rid as part of a divestiture process and selling some of their food line type stuff to ShopRite Checkers. In terms of the kinds of things that we would want when we take over, it's where you have cash reserves as a strength. So you remember that this kind of approach is where you have lots of strengths interacting with opportunities. So we've spoken about how a strength would be the cash reserve and the opportunity would be the sale of a competitor. You could also go into debt, or you can just allow additional equity. Guys, and then just from a purchasing perspective, you can buy the organization in terms of lock, stock, and barrel type approaches. You can buy a majority, or you can simply just have some sort of share. So we see how companies work together, and when we start drawing lines within industries, it's everything is connected to everything else. It is the modern way. It's about economies of scale. It's about sharing skills. It's about sharing competencies. Vertical integration, where you take over either, as I said, your supplier to get closer to your supply chain, or you take over your intermediary in order to get closer to customers. I've used these examples before. We know that Geely, who owns Volvo, who had bought Volvo from Ford in the UK, now has bought several component manufacturers in Australia in order to get a more permanent supply route sorted for their components for Geely. Now, the fact that Geely builds Volvo is impressive because Geely itself, as a vehicle, it's not the most impressive vehicle around. But we could also see the link between Geely and a Volvo, where this Jolion looks so much like a Volvo that you can clearly see that the design team overlaps between those vehicles. And then forward vertical integration, where you take over your intermediaries. I've spoken about how Ola now is the franchise owner for Milky Lane. So when you go to Milky Lane, you get Ola ice cream, essentially closer to your customers. Who are the Milky Lane customers? Who remembers when last they went to Milky Lane? Who still orders milkshake when they go to Wimpy like a kid? Any milkshake. I honestly realized this weekend that I have the food habits of a 12-year-old. I still buy pink milk and I drink pink milk. It's my favorite thing in the world. It has to do with being taken off the breast too early. I'm kidding. I'm being recorded as well. I still drink pink milk. I just realized as I'm buying chocolate sweets and pink milk, and I'm thinking, dude, you're 58. You need to grow up. Simple things, boy. Not growing up is one of them. Okay, and there is the example there, guys. I think with these slides, I actually did copy all the pages from the textbook in, and where I didn't, I actually scanned some extra ones as well. So these cooperative corporate combination strategies, I think where you operate in a high technology industry, it's very difficult for one competitor to track all advances in technology. So we've seen in terms of your high-tech industries where people share technologies, where they share innovations, where one benefits from the other, but a week later these items appear on a shelf in competition with one another. It really is those high-tech industries where when you get something, you don't know what the components are. And in fact, often you could be buying a Nissan, but you would get Renault components because that's where the world is. Buy a Toyota, you get Subaru components, and the other way around. You buy an Audi and you get Volkswagen technologies underneath. You buy a Lamborghini and you get Volkswagen technologies underneath. So we've seen how these companies work together, how where they form these temporary partnerships, strategic relationships, or move into a longer term setup. Yeah. Well, that's the problem. You know, when is collusion? I think collusion is when you start price fixing. We saw collusion in terms of the big five contracting firms, construction firms in South Africa, where they would decide beforehand who would get the next government tender, and then they would all gear their tender prices so that this person gets specific benefit, this company. And it's like A, B, C, D, E. This month it's me, next month it's you, and highly inflated prices. Everyone then overinflated their own prices in order for these companies to get government tenders. Now, obviously, the Competition Bureau looked at that, and there were massive fines that they had to pay. But the truth is, we see these kinds of collusion things, price fixing and collusion, very, very, very real. But we also see industrial espionage. We see the opposite of people simply just stealing technologies. The Chinese, if you look at some of their design, they literally just copy what is out there and then claim that it's theirs. So some of the options, the first one, joint venture. Yeah, so here you create a third organization in order to take advantage of a particular opportunity. This silly example, and I'm so sorry to default to cars, but it's where I spend a lot of my life. We know that the Toyota 86 and the Subaru BRZ would never have happened if those two companies didn't work together. And subsequent to that, Toyota now owns a majority share in Subaru. But the Toyota 86, which launched as a rear-wheel drive sports car for under 300,000 Rand when it came out. I don't know what the 86 is now. I don't even know if they still build the 86. The BRZ, do they still build it? It must be now, what, 400,000 or more. But the reality is it would never have happened without that joint venture. We also see it in entry-level vehicles where companies work together to essentially capitalize on an opportunity. It's about sharing skills, it's about sharing risk, it's about sharing technologies, it's about sharing knowledge, it's about making sure that every partner in the joint venture uses their core business and benefiting from the other businesses, focused business as well. Strategic alliance, yeah, very similar, but it's temporary. So we could look at advancing technology in a specific area. You form the strategic alliance, and obviously what you do again is you share risk, you reduce cost, and everyone benefits from the alliance. We see terms of alliances, for example, when Blu-ray, and we spoke about Blu-ray technologies, how we made it the standard in the industry was because Sony offered it to their competitors, and as a strategic alliance, they then set that as the high definition standard. And then defensive strategies. This is where we have a lot of threats intersecting with a lot of weaknesses. If you are in South Africa at this stage, lots of companies considering defensive strategies, whether they turn around strategies, whether they divestiture strategies, whether they retrenchment strategies. And again, it's when you are on the verge of going under and you need to find an alternative. So the Massmart example, very real. Edcon, in terms of all the stuff that they had done to try and save Edgar's, very real. Who still shops at Edgar's? Anyone shop at Edgar's? I can't imagine people going into Edgar's. My brain doesn't process that. Shop at Edgar's. Parents shop at Edgar's. Who is shopping for them to keep that place open? Do you think they just sell drugs and it's a front for a drug operation? We've got the best in town. Okay, so in terms of the retrenchment strategy, the example that Jen uploaded the other day, it's about cost cutting. It's about getting rid of non-performing assets. It's about realizing where your core business is and realizing where you should be competing. So the focus here is to get rid of non-essential items. So these are items that we manufacture, and on the basis of that, we believe that they are certain loss makers. I mean, the chip shortage in terms of the auto industry has seen companies stop manufacturing entire lines because of being able to access the silicon and accessing the chips to run the vehicles. You could improve productivity, so you could automate, and we've seen companies go from 300 employees to 20 employees by just having a significant capital investment. Lots of South African companies moving to automation because our labor is massively inefficient, low productivity, and issues in terms of strike action still being a reality. Renegotiating debt, leasing, buying, you can see some of the others, and then also selling off assets that don't make sense to you. Yeah, and then recovery strategy, we've seen several of these. The post office now has a new CEO. They had these a recent CEO is apparently going to change the world. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to change a plug on a cord. So the simple truth is we have a new CEO, and what they've done is they simply have moved into anti-competitive behavior, and they are now forcing, because of a piece of legislation, for any parcel that is sent in this country, it has to be sent via the post office. So PostNet has now interdicted that. So anything under 1 kg, the law says, has to go through the post office. So my wife just said, well, put a brick in the box, because rather pay the extra weight, because imagine what happens in terms of the post office. We also know that Wish now has this long-term strategic arrangement, wish.com, with the post office. Stuff still doesn't arrive. I think I'm on my 4th refund for stuff that has disappeared in the system. Anyone order from wish.com? I think the wish.com is that you wish actually it gets here, because it never ever arrives and it gets stolen. You can see it gets into South Africa, you can see it gets to the post office, and then it evaporates. It evaporates. Sorry, boiler?
Everything evaporates in the post.
And that postal system is dodgy. Now they're using legislation to force average South Africans to use them. Imagine that's what you default to. You're completely useless at your job, but you get some sort of piece of legislation that's been around for 100 years to force people to use you so that you can carry on being inefficient, you can carry on stealing, but the law says you have to. Postnet has interdicted them, so it's going to be very interesting. You can't even send a book through Postnet in the future. You'd have to go via the post office.
So now textbooks now.
Textbooks will have to come via the post office because it's under a kg.
I'll be surprised.
That's it. Just buy everything in one big box. Make sure that it's more than a kg. But they're trying to get all parcels in terms of the legislation to move via the post office. So it's incredibly anti-competitive. We have the competitions board. Why are they not reacting to that? But you see, you've got a piece of legislation that was written under apartheid laws to protect white workers in apartheid, during apartheid time. And now what we say is we just default to apartheid laws to try and save a company that's useless. I'm being recorded. So anyone whose parents work for post office, I love them. Please don't give them my home address. Okay. So recovery strategy, new blood. We've seen with Mitch Slape came in to Massmart. He has tried very hard, but Massmart, in terms of the looting, was hit so incredibly hard. And I can't understand why security guards weren't flown in with helicopters to protect our local macro. I cannot understand that. An attack helicopter shooting looters would have been better than having my macro looted. I'm already missing macro, clearly. There goes my Saturday mornings. Okay.
So I would have been there for free if they got rid of the macro card system.
What's that word?
If they got rid of the macro card system, I would have been there.
Yeah, you see, do you think the looters had macro cards? Because the system clearly doesn't. That's facetious and nasty, I know. Guys, and then revenue growth strategy. Yeah, looking at growing sales. It's about reducing prices. We often see it in the airline industry, especially when there's a bit of a price war on, where you can fly to Joburg for a couple of $100. So the focus is always about trying to just get more people in, have economies of scale kick in, and make some sort of profit. It's interesting to see how our price war in food retail has picked up again. Everyone has crazy specials and bulk specials, and it just shows you how sad my life is, that I actually know food specials and where to buy specific things. I can feel my estrogen levels rising. I'm pretty sure there's a sexist comment in there somewhere suggesting that women should do shopping. My wife doesn't do the shopping, I do the shopping, so don't worry about it. Guys, and then divestiture is where we close down and we step away. We've seen companies pull out of South Africa. Chev left South Africa, divested from South Africa. Citroen left. Citroen's come back in and just brought their SUVs, because South Africa is a very popular market for SUVs. I believe Toyota is threatening to leave South Africa. I don't know if anyone saw that.
They said the top dog at Toyota in Japan phoned the president and said if they touch the Toyota factory in South Africa, they will dissolve it, break it down, and they will just, they're not going to stay.
But that's the way you need to do it. That's the way you need, because people don't respond to logic, they respond to threat. I mean, I'm a big fan of Ramaphosa, and I've said this before, but this notion that everything is bloody consensus decision making with him drives me over the edge. And sometimes during crises, there's nothing wrong with being an autocrat, because that's what you require. You can't have 10 people sit around and think, oh, what are we going to do? They're looting. It has to be a very clear instruction. But that to me is the way that it should be done. Toyota leaves this country, guys. Imagine the supply chain disruptions. Imagine the thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people that lose their jobs. But they did the looters stay away from Toyota.
I think they have their own security for a large portion,
Yeah.
but they said that they touched them.
Yeah. But I think I told you guys last year that we have more private security guards in South Africa than we have policemen. There's something wrong with the country when that happens. Because where do your taxes go? There's definitely a disconnect in this country. And we'll see more companies leave. I think
the government wanted to put limitations on crowd security. Because there's more crowd
yeah.
security.
Well, I think I told people, I came down one Saturday morning to class, and somebody had been run over, and sadly, it's someone from my wife's church who had subsequently died in Hesketh, and had been run over. The ambulance, the traffic control, everything that happened there was MI7. There wasn't a single municipal person there. There wasn't a single person that wasn't MI7. The ambulance people were MI7, controlling traffic, saving lives, directing, providing security. You cannot have that a private firm has to do that. I mean, it's traffic control. Where are the traffic officers? But we understand with some of the traffic officers that a lot of the vehicles aren't even operational anymore. That either there's no petrol or they've broken down or simply just the entire system has collapsed. Anyone move across to MI7 since they've got here? They're making a big impression.
Magma and MI7 are in most areas.
Yeah. You see, I'm still with ADT. They're not very good. And when I left them, they gave me a 50% discount. And then I thought, oh, it's too much hassle because they'd have to come take their stuff out and then I'd have to bring MI7 in. But that's all COVID, and I don't really want people in my house at the moment. So I stayed with them for another 2 years. But the simple truth is we're at a point where we cannot afford private security anymore. Because you already pay taxes to pay for the police, but then your security costs you the same. Very, very strange. Guys, divestiture options, internal, so essentially just focusing on your core business, staying with your core business, and anything that doesn't link to your core business, getting rid of it, often outsourcing it to suppliers, making sure that you do what your core business is. Selling off parts of the businesses that are underperforming. Again, often we saw when Ford sold off Range Rover, Jaguar, and Volvo, they were all underperforming, and then they went to Tata and Geely, respectively, and they've started performing. Range Rover, again, in serious trouble. The Chinese have stopped buying Range Rover, so we don't see Range Rover producing the profits that they were up till recently. Harvesting, again, if there's a business that doesn't make sense. So when we think of Edcon getting rid of Boardman's, why Edcon, who was initially clothing and those kinds of things, bought a furniture store, got rid of Boardman's. I don't think Boardman's exists anymore at all. It was expensive. I didn't think it was that exclusive. And then also focusing on your niche, finding those pockets where you make sense in terms of customer needs. Okay, guys, we're going to take a 15-minute break.